Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Monday, February 14th. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Thanks for being here today. We've got a great show on tap for you. We're going to get things kicked off today with a conversation between Alan and Casey Rosenthal, who's the CEO and co-founder of Verica. And they discuss a recent collaboration between Verica and Dish Network. Dish is going to be using Verica's continuous verification platform for Kubernetes and Kafka on its 5G smart network. So Verica uses kind of a chaos engineering approach to simulate adverse conditions. So this technology will allow Dish to proactively identify and fix software issues before customers experience connectivity disruption. I can tell you from personal experience that will be an awesome thing. All right, after that, Alan speaks with John Morello, who is the VP of Product Management for Prisma Cloud over at Palo Alto Networks. They discuss the State of Cloud Native Security Report, which Palo Alto Networks puts together every year, and they recently surveyed 3,000 cloud security and DevOps professionals from around the world to gain insight into organizations' cloud adoption strategies, budgets, experiences, and future plans. It's a lot of insight derived from this report. Definitely a conversation worth checking out. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is part one of a two-part conversation that host Mike Jones has with Vidya Sakar. She's the senior security service engineer at Microsoft. They have a really fascinating conversation that kind of meanders through everything from the future of mankind, technology, AI, friendships, hardships, diversity, and so much more. So it's definitely an interesting conversation and some food for thought in that conversation as well. So do check that one out. After that, we have a replay of the Open Mainframe series. This one is the predictions for 2022. We thought they were so good, we're running it again. This has hosts Alan and John Murdo, who is the Director of Program Management over at the Linux Foundation. They're discussing 2022 predictions with some leaders of three of the Open Mainframe's most mature and popular projects. Kip Twitchell from IBM, Peter Fannell from Rocket Software, and Suharsana Srivanasan of IBM are the three guests on the show along with Alan and John. Great insight derived in this conversation. Really, if you have a couple minutes, please do check that one out as well. It's a great conversation. After that, I'm back with the news headlines, and then I have a conversation with Ben Smith, who is the field CTO over at NetWitness, and we discuss how the Great Resignation is creating the great vulnerability in organizations. And he provides some definite good insight for organizations. I don't think that there is a company out there right now that is not experiencing the Great Resignation in some way, shape, or form, whether it's employees leaving or joining the organization. Definitely, there are some vulnerability conversations to be had within the organization. So definitely want to check out this one with Ben Smith. After that, I've got the webinars preview for you, and then we have the View with Vizard, which Mike Vizard is speaking with Commodore CTO Eitel Schwartz. They discuss a new open source Valid Kube project that is making it easier to troubleshoot Kubernetes clusters. Great technology, very relevant in today's cloud native space, so definitely check that one out as well. All right, this is today's lineup, and it is a good one, folks, and we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. First up, we've got a conversation between Alan and Casey Rosenthal, who's the CEO and co-founder of Verica. Dish Network is going to leverage Verica's continuous verification platform for Kubernetes and Kafka on its 5G smart network. So Alan and Casey discuss what the technology is going to do for Dish Network and its customers in enabling Dish to proactively identify and fix software issues before customers experience connectivity disruption. Good stuff there. Great conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. My guest this segment is my friend Casey Rosenthal. Casey is the CEO of Verica and author of a great book and all kinds of good stuff. Casey, it's good to see you. Not in person, but at least it's good to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Alan.
Absolutely. I was actually hoping, next week we would all be out in San Francisco for RSA, but it looks like, they pushed that to June. So hopefully by June, maybe we'll see you there in person.
The weather will be nicer, so we have that to look forward.
That should be true. It's usually a little chilly there in February. It's chilly in San Francisco. You're in Maine, so.
Yeah, chilly's relative. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in South Florida, so chilly takes on a whole different connotation here. But anyway, Casey, for people who aren't familiar with Verica, maybe we should start there. Why don't you give a quick Verica kind of background?
Sure. So Verica is a continuous verification company. We make software in the realm of continuous verification. And that's kind of rooted in chaos engineering, which I defined and developed at Netflix. And so what that is we've seen this evolution in the industry over the past, say, 15, 20 years. As systems get bigger and more complex, the industry moved into first CI, continuous integration, where jamming everybody's code together limited the rate at which we made bugs. And so that allowed engineers to create features faster. So that was continuous integration. Then CD, and that was, around 2005-ish, that kind of really took hold. And then CD, continuous delivery, picked up and said, okay, now that we can create features faster, how do we get those features in front of customers faster? So continuous delivery, CD, automates the process of getting those features in front of customers faster. So we can build the features faster. We can get them in front of customers faster. We're moving fast. Now, how do we not break things? And that's where CV, continuous verification, comes in as kind of the third and final piece of that evolution, where we see large enterprises developing CV continuous verification programs, or buying commercial products like Verica makes, to verify that they still get the properties that they want out of a system while all of those changes are being made asynchronously under the hood.
Excellent. That was a great definition there.
Cool.
Casey, well, and I'd be that I didn't mention, you guys also have a great team at Verica. You've got some great projects underway, and our friend James Wickett, of course. And what was the project I interviewed a couple months ago when they launched it?
Oh, the Void?
The Void, yes, the Void.
Yes. Yeah, so the Void is great.
Tell them about that too.
Yeah, the Void is great. So we basically started researching public incidents, publicly available data on incidents. So Facebook outages, AWS outages, stuff like that, down to companies less popular in the limelight, but basically we grabbed as many public resources as we could on those, originally for product development for us, so that as we're building verifications for infrastructure, we can say, all right, there's a category, a class of outages. Our software could have helped prevent that, or ameliorated the effects of that particular kind of outage. but the LFI community, the learning from incidents community, as we were sharing research with them, they're like, you know what, there's a lot of value in this data. So we went ahead and made it public at the void.community. So that's the Verica Open Incident Database, and people can contribute incidents, but we're still developing out a research platform there where people can go and basically search incident data to find, for example, information on outages on, if you wanted to know about US East 1 going down, you could get a list of not only AWS information, but information from different journals and public sources about US East going, having issues. If that, hypothetically were to ever happen. Not that anything ever happens to AWS, but
never.
Yeah.
Never. In recorded history.
Yeah.
All right. So, Casey, recent news out of Verica is around this new partnership you guys have announced. I don't want to say more. I'm going to let you tell the story. Why don't you tell our audience?
Sure. So we recently signed a deal with Dish Cellular. So they're launching the first large ORAN, Open Radio Access Network cellular service in the United States, and it's just going to be a massive infrastructure launched on top of AWS. They're heavily utilizing Kubernetes and Kafka in that setup, and Verica's primary infrastructure modules address Kubernetes and Kafka availability and security aspects of those pieces of infrastructure. So they came to us as their continuous verification solution to make sure that they can build out this network and verify that the business gets the business properties that they need out of the system while they're evolving this next generation cellular network. So very exciting for us. Obviously, you can imagine how critical a wireless network is to everything from first responders to businesses to regular consumers. So being a part of that journey, ensuring that call quality and all of those network services are reliable is really exciting for us.
Sure. Hey, I'm going to need you to help me out here. So I'm not sure what an ORAN, is that what you called it?
Oh yeah, ORAN stands for Open Radio Access Network. So it's basically a new open source stack for delivering 5G, and it's kind of a consortium backed method for doing that. And so Dish Cellular will be the first one to do that in the U.S. There's a couple companies internationally that are rolling out similar networks. And then the rest of the industry is kind of sitting back and watching. And if that's successful, then, it's expected that they'll jump in as well. The really interesting capability that Dish Cellular will be able to provide that I haven't heard of before, at least here in the US, is basically they'll be able to sell slices of 5G as private networks. So like you could get a SIM for your company, and then, your company could have some amount of bandwidth, throughout. Yeah.
Almost like going back to selling T1 lines, except now in 5G. Can you think?
Yeah. Or ISDN or something like, it's.
So they're going to sell the same bandwidth pattern over and over again, or? Just kidding.
I have no idea. The use cases that they spoke about with AWS, with an announcement they made with AWS last month, were use cases along the lines of if a hospital wants a secure 5G network for, IoT devices within a hospital, they can add SIM cards to those devices, and then they don't have to establish a Wi-Fi network with routers. They get the benefits of cellular and the benefits of having a private secure network.
It sounds great. Look, from Verica's point of view, I guess the takeaway though is that this is a mass scale, right? Scale, hyperscale kind of environment. And,
Absolutely.
For Verica to be able to perform here, it's got to be able to perform at scale.
Yeah.
At a scale that few applications will see.
Yeah, I would be surprised if Dish Cellular wasn't the largest or close to the largest AWS customer by the end of the year. So this is it's really fun for us to be able to work on a project this big. I haven't been that excited about such a big project since I the track team at Netflix.
Really?
It's
cool. Just think about that. The largest AWS customer, that says it all.
And now I would have to assume, like, if Dish Cellular jumps in here, the Verizons and the AT&Ts and the T-Mobiles and so forth are not far behind.
Hey, stay tuned for other for other announcements from us throughout the year. But yeah, certainly
that would be good.
Yeah, we've got a lot of interest in the telecom community, certainly, and it goes back to the criticality of phone calls. People know. Verizon bet its reputation on the whole "Can you hear me now" thing, like reliability. Yeah, reliability is their blood. But
it's not just phone calls. To be fair.
Look, the promise of 5G, phone calls work pretty good right now for the most part, much better than they did 5-10 years ago. But,
yeah.
The promise of 5G is really, in a lot of places, we've replaced our Ethernet with Wi-Fi. But you know what? For any of my audience out here who sat in on Zoom calls over Wi-Fi, at some point you get that little dreaded, the networks become unstable, or all of a sudden everybody freezes mid-smile, they can't get the, and then it comes back on 30 seconds later. It's not the end of the world, but there's always those little gotchas, right? The promise of 5G is we're going off of Wi-Fi, we're going off Ethernet, but we're still going to have that depth of that wide bandwidth.
Yeah.
But it's with the reliability of a cellular network versus a Wi-Fi network, or maybe it's a little of both. You have those options.
That's the dream. That's the promise.
That is the promise.
You're right. But you also look at, so I'm a glass half full kind of guy. It's not going to be tomorrow, but will it be the day after or the day after that? Yeah, I think eventually you're going to see that kind of, what's the word? What's Facebook's new name? Whatever. Meta, right. It's all part of this metaverse, right? Who knows? We'll see. We'll see what happens. But anyway, you know what, Casey? Kudos to you and the Verica team, though, because it really is. I'm sure they put this through a proof of concept and did their tests and their due diligence, and it really says something important about the Verica solution. To be able to scale up like that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Like you mentioned earlier, we've got a great team. Aaron Reinhardt, James
Aaron,
Wickett.
yeah, I forgot to mention. Yeah.
Leah Cunningham runs our engineering team. Courtney Nash, who runs the Void. She, some of your viewers might remember her from. She was responsible for content at O'Reilly, basically the books and the conferences back when they were doing Velocity. So it's a
great team.
Yeah, knock on wood,
it's also great that you could talk about this, though, Casey. I
remember back in my days at Still Secure, we were a provider of NAC. We had a NAC solution. And, our biggest NAC customers were in the DoD, some 3 letters agencies. And, I would go to a Gartner conference and the Gartner analyst would be up there with one of our competitors talking about a NAC implementation at a financial institution for 10,000 endpoints. And the Gartner guy was saying, this is by far the largest NAC implementation in the world, and it shows how scalable vendor A is. And I know I'm on a network with 400,000 nodes doing NAC, right? 10,000 is baby crap compared to what I'm dealing with over here. But we're not allowed to say anything. I'm just sitting there shaking my head because we can't say anything.
Yeah.
But, the fact that you could talk about this is great.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and that's a credit to Dish. They're really doing a lot of great work to get the word out about how cutting edge their implementation is, so to be a part of that and to be able to talk about it. It just helps everybody. Helps keep the enthusiasm going. Helps attract more bright people to the hard problems. So it's it's really fun.
So,
hey, Case, we're almost out of time. But for people out here saying, you know what, if good enough for Dish, good enough for me, I'd like to find out more about this. How can they?
So our website, verica.io. If people have questions about chaos engineering or continuous verification, it's pretty easy to find me online. Casey Rosenthal on Twitter. And if you're interested in incident analysis, the void.community is the address for the Void research project. And there's our first big white paper last year talks all about MTTR and root cause analysis and what we can know and not know about those things. So there's a lot of great takeaways that can influence policy at large enterprises. Those would be the primary ways to get a hold of us. Like I said, where it's knock on wood, it's a fun time to be working in this space. So
it is. There's some crazy stuff happening.
Hey man, thanks for coming on. Say hello to Aaron and James and everyone. Keep up the great work, Casey. And hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll see you in June in RSA.
Hopefully, I'll see you there, Alan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Casey Rosenthal, CEO of Verica, here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a little commercial break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up, Alan speaks with John Morello, who is the VP of Product Management for Prisma Cloud over at Palo Alto Networks. John and Alan discuss the State of Cloud Native Security Report the Palo Alto Networks recently put together. They spoke with 3,000 cloud security and DevOps professionals from around the world to gain some insight into the organization's cloud adoption strategies, budgets, experiences, and future plans. Good stuff. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to have my friend John Morello here on Techstrong TV.
Hey, Alan, good to see you again.
John, always a pleasure to see you, my friend. John, of course, for those who don't know, is a VP of product now at Palo Alto.
Correct, yes.
Yep. And John came over to Palo Alto from the original cloud security company.
Not cloud.
Container security company, Twistlock. It was like my first time being introduced to container security. But John was also instrumental in the whole move from Palo Alto to Prisma and the whole cloud security unit at Palo. So John, welcome. Good to see you again. You know, in another alternate universe, we'd be getting ready to go to RSA next week and maybe share a beer in person.
But no, we were going to
maybe in June when they moved it, I think. So hopefully,
you know what, the weather will be better.
That's true.
You know what? So that's a good thing. Anyway, though, I want to jump into it, John. Palo Alto recently came out with their State of Cloud Native Security report. It's kind of it's become an annual tradition now. Was this the third, fourth year? I don't remember.
Yeah, something like that. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, something like that.
Yep. And we got you to tell us all about it. So I'm going to turn it over to you, John. Let's hear about this year's report.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the big thing from this year's report is really just more factual data supporting a few concepts that you and I think, intimately understand already because we've seen it. We've talked to so many customers and people that are in this space. But I think it's always good to have additional data points that support this. And to me, the two biggest takeaways from this report is, number one, the importance of shift left as a principle, as not just like a feature that you buy or enable in some software, but there's an entire like operational mindset shift. And specifically talking about that notion of finding and fixing and preventing security problems at all layers of the stack earlier in the life cycle than previously you had done, and certainly earlier than in production. Obviously from the Twistlog days, you're very familiar with what we did for like finding vulnerabilities in images that were being built or serverless functions were being built. And that's still a big part of it. But the other thing that this report speaks to is the importance and ability to do that at the infrastructure layer as well, right? I mean, as now everything that you're deploying on AWS or Azure, GCP, you're probably deploying that via Terraform or CloudFormation or some kind of infrastructure as code capability. And one of the things that's core in this report is talking about the importance of shifting left, not just for your application level, but also for the infrastructure as well, and how that not only provides you better security outcomes, but also just generally better business outcomes, right? Because it enables your developers to be able to more quickly ship software, to have less problems when they're doing so. And that means that ultimately their customers, your internal business units or, the external people that depend on whatever services that you're building are able to get their software faster and better and to have more features that are added to it. So that notion of shift left is one big part of it. And to me, another aspect of the report that's really important, is just talking about the importance of having that security policy and that mentality across both layers of the stack. So not just looking at the application vulnerabilities and problems that exist there, but again, at the infrastructure level and having that really tightly aligned with the business. So that the business, every organization is becoming a software company or a software-driven organization to some degree, regardless of what industry you're in. And because of that, the tooling that you need to use to provide that software out to your end users, it's important that tooling not be disruptive. So we talked about shift left as being one aspect of that, but there's also just the aspect of having a good security function, a process that prioritizes security as part of the way that the business operates, that aligns that risk mitigation with the business's imperatives and the kinds of opportunities that they want to focus on. And so you don't have that disconnect where security is always the organization saying no, but where security in the most productive organizations in our survey is entwined in that business process. So it's really about enablement and not about preventing people from doing things. So those two, the notion of shifting left from a technology standpoint and tight alignment of security with your development organization, your business that's driving those development requirements, those to me were the two biggest interesting points in the survey.
John, listening to that, look, to me, in many ways, these are kind of two heads of the same coin, which is it's about integrating security and security best practices into the fabric of your business. If your business is developing applications, right, and there are some companies that's what they do is their business, it's, core critical, right? Shifting security left is is imperative. And I'll go one step further. It's not just shifting security left, John. It's shifting a lot of the. I recorded a DevOps Unbound episode yesterday where we talked about performance testing, right? A holistic approach to performance testing. And we got into this whole notion of shifting left, and we tend to think of it as a security thing, but it's really, it goes beyond, right? As we shift left, some of this testing, security testing included, a pound of prevention, an ounce of prevention, a pound of cure, right?
Exactly.
And it's true. But in order to do that, there's got to be a mindset. Like you don't shift security left by accident.
Right.
You also don't do it by just buying a product. I think people have is they think like, well, I need to buy some product. And there's certainly technologies and products that can help you with that. But as I said earlier, it really is about a mindset and a way to operate and a different approach to the way that you think about those relationships between your security team and the IT organization and the business that ultimately both are there to, help satisfy and to facilitate. That's the kind of shift that, is difficult for a lot of organizations, especially those that think it's just a matter of like buying a product, because again, products are part of it, but it's really more about that organizational change than the product change.
But that's been such a bugaboo in security for as long as I'm in security, shiny trinket syndrome. Oh, there's a new magic bullet this year. Let's load them up, right? And it'll sit on the shelf like last year's magic bullet and the magic bullet before that. It really, it's not a product. But that mindset, to me, is let's integrate security. Security is everyone's responsibility. It doesn't happen by itself. We need to integrate it into our business processes, right? As corny as it sounds, that whole Bill Gates trustworthy computing initiative.
Geez, it's got to be almost 20 years ago now, right?
I was at Microsoft when that memo was written, and it really did instantiate a tremendous amount of change within the organization. It really got every product team to think differently about security, not as something that was kind of this irritating thing that you had to deal with after you shipped a product, but something that needed to be part of every product design and development and test process. Yeah. And again, I think that notion about software eating the world, people say that a little bit too often, but the reality is no matter what your business is, even if you're a government, you serve your constituents, they expect to be able to interact with you digitally. Certainly if you're, doing anything B2C, people expect to have that kind of online experience with you, and even B2B companies. If I'm going to spend $1 million on a tractor or a piece of manufacturing equipment, I probably expect that it's going to be smart enough to tell the manufacturer that there's a problem that's going to be coming that needs to be fixed before that problem actually occurs. So, I think everybody's starting to realize, and in fact, in many cases already have adopted this notion of software needing to be a core competency of the organization, even if you're not primarily selling software as as kind of a pure play product company. And because of that, like if software is fundamental to the way that everybody operates, it's really important that security be part of that same mentality, that same kind of discipline, and be given the same prioritization and focus that a feature would, so that people don't end up recreating some of those sins of the past where security issues, weren't found out until they were actually, deployed and had already had a negative impact on people.
Agreed. Very much agreed. You know what, John? People out here saying, yeah, that fits right into the Palo Alto mantra. Is that really what people are saying in the survey? Can you give us some examples of how that manifests itself and, some of the responses and findings in the survey?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting findings in there that really talks to the point that you just raised there is that we found that for organizations that said that they had tightly integrated DevSecOps into the way that they just built their software and operated their environments, were 7 times more likely to say that they had strong or very strong security postures. And they were 9 times more likely to say that they had low levels of security friction in their organizations. So yeah, it definitely is aligned with, with our, our marketing and the way that we think about things. But, I think that's because that's just what reality is, right? And I think it's kind of an obvious thing, but again, it's always good to have data that supports some of those, obvious points. specifically to say if you're doing DevSecOps, you're really living it. You didn't, again, like to your point, just buy a product and kind of put it on the shelf, but you're really using that as the way that you operate. You can see a very significant reduction in the amount of security friction that you have, and also just an increase in the security posture that you have. So you're in a better place. Security is more there by default. It's more just embedded into your organization. And that means that the friction that people encounter is also much lower. And, again, not really a surprise, but it's really good to have real world data that supports that assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to the crap I took over the last 7-8 years, John, from my friends in the security world who said that DevSecOps wasn't real. It wasn't a thing, right? And it's good to see this kind of validation. So
yeah, for sure.
Good for that.
Moving beyond these two findings, what else in the report kind of caught your eye?
Well, I mean, I think, again, it's not that this is surprising, but, we continue to see like significant adoption of cloud. So we're seeing now about 70% of organizations are saying that they host more than half of their workloads. So a literal majority of their workloads in the cloud. But I think that the other aspect that's interesting about that is it also highlights the fact that organizations still have a lot of stuff that's not in the cloud too. And part of the way that we see the world is, we think cloud is very much not just the future, but the present for people, but also acknowledge that there's things that you have that you're probably going to have a decade from now that you're still going to operate in your own environment for all kinds of very good reasons, from regulatory and performance and other reasons that, you have that it just may be easier for you to keep something that's already working where it is. And so the way that we try to approach this space is to give people that flexibility and power of choice. For all your cloud providers, we have all the posture management capabilities and identity entitlement management and workload protection. But for things that you operate in your own data center, if you're happy to also run OpenShift in your own on-premises physical data center, from Prisma Cloud, you can protect that on-premises environment, as well as all those AWS and Azure and GCP accounts where you're also running your applications. And I think that increasingly, and one of the points that's in the survey, is that organizations are really trying to reduce the amount of security tooling that they have. We talked earlier about that notion of shelfware, which is a really real thing. Historically, people bought a lot of tools. And because when you buy a lot of tools, the burden of deploying and integrating those things falls on you as the customer. A lot of times people would buy these things and never use them because it was too difficult, too time consuming to be able to actually put them into practice. And as we see people trying to converge on a more unified approach to doing security across all these different hybrid clouds that they have, it really speaks to the strength of what we offer within Prisma Cloud and similar kinds of approaches that say, look, it's not about buying 20 different tools to solve 20 different problems, but buy into a platform that gives you that breadth of capabilities, but where the cost of integration is borne by us as the provider. We've done the work to make sure those things are integrated together. You can have unified views and consistent policies and consistent ways to do alerting. You as the customer aren't responsible for stitching all that stuff together on your own. The survey, I think the point in there basically was that organizations are really trying to focus on reducing the number of vendors that they use, because what we're seeing is that one of the statements from the report was that the more vendors an organization is using for cloud security, generally the poorer they felt that their security posture was, because again, they know that there's those gaps that they are yet to integrate, but the cost for doing that integration still falls upon them.
Interesting. So first of all, I got to tell you, I'm blown away because I don't think it could have been more than 4 or 5, maybe it was 5-6 years ago, where the numbers we were seeing was that, among enterprises, 10% of their work, payload infrastructure was in the cloud. So to hear now that it's 50% or better, for a large, super majority, is...
That's incredible. I mean, that's a real migration, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's crazy.
And this is something that people, I think, have, you and I and others like us probably have known that was going to happen for a decade, but now we're far enough along where you're really starting to see that.
You see it.
What's actually happened. I told somebody the other day, think about the last time that you've heard somebody say, my goal is to have more physical infrastructure and run more of the stuff in my own data centers. You go to any conference, talk to anybody, it's very difficult for you to hear anybody tell you that that's their view of the future.
Absolutely. It's crazy. Though I'll be honest, I know a bunch of people down here in South Florida who actually work for data center companies, and they claim business is booming.
People setting up OpenShift, stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying earlier, about hybrid cloud. I truly don't think it's like a one or the other. And some of the problems with any surveys, and this one included, is, cloud is not a very precisely defined term, right? Like cloud, I think, means different things in some cases to different people. In general, I think most people would say that it involves running your stuff on somebody else's computer. But whether cloud means like AWS or, like you said in your case, if you're a private data center provider and you've got a really nice, let's say, VMware stack, and you've got vCloud Director and all that stuff there, it's a pretty similar experience. You're able to offer maybe some more customized services, have more control over data locality and so forth. And so I think there's a place for all those things. Like I said, we view the world as being hybrid already, and just more of that going forward. It's not going to be that 100% of stuff is in Amazon, but it's also not going to be that 100% of stuff is in your own data center either. And I think you're starting to see all that stuff kind of normalize, and we're kind of getting the feel there where there's different tools that are better suited for different problems, and people are making rational choices about what they want to use where.
Yep. I think, the bottom line is, if there's 50% up in the cloud, there's 50% not.
Exactly.
And over the next few years, that may fluctuate to 60-40 or even 65-33 or 65-35, whatever, but it's still going to leave a lot of infrastructure in one place or the other. And we're just talking about hybrid now. Then you get into this whole multi-cloud thing, right? I got some stuff in Amazon, I got a little bit at Azure, and I got some on GCP, some at a local data center, and then some at my own place, right? Or maybe I got a big IBM Z somewhere, right? Because I still use that. It's crazy to throw away my investment. We've got other stuff in two cloud providers. And that's the reality, right? It's nice if we all were on a green field. I called you in and said, John, I'm starting a company from scratch tomorrow, and we're going to put everything in, a public cloud provider. But that's not the way the world works,
right? And that's why
even the fact that we've moved 50% to cloud at this point
is such a big goddamn number.
Yeah, and like I said, that's one of the things that we really see as just a fundamental reality, and the way that we think about building products is to obviously be reflective of that reality, is that people have things in many places. And in fact, one of the things that I've observed talking with all these customers over the years is that not only are people multi-cloud, but they are intentionally multi-cloud. They don't want to recreate kind of the pricing and vendor leverage dynamics that VMware and Microsoft and Oracle have had over them in the past. They want to be able to reasonably say, like, hey, I might have 60% of my stuff in AWS, but I want to have 40% in Azure, so that the next time that I'm renewing my enterprise agreements, I can tell Amazon, if I don't get the kind of terms that I want, look, I've got a real thing over here. I can do more workloads over there. And so it's important that the security tooling supports that. You don't want to say, like, well, if I go from one to the other, now I have to completely re-architect and rethink about how I do security. You want to have a consistent set of capabilities across all those places that you choose to deploy into.
Yep. I think another part of that one, John, is choosing the right tool for the job. Right? As I've gotten older, I've learned having the right tool makes all the difference in the world. And each public cloud, each potential hosting solution, whether it's private, whatever, has certain advantages and disadvantages, and you want to pick the right tool for the job.
Absolutely.
That's kind of counter to the one throat to choke, less vendors. Right, I think for security vendors, having, this has always been a tension in security, right? Do I pick best of breed across the whole gamut spectrum, or do I go with, a suite vendor, right? Even when we used to talk about endpoint stuff, right? Or host-based security, right? It was that. And that
goes back and forth, right? It's a little bit of a pendulum.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's interesting that we're seeing that trend as well. John, we're about out of time, but for people who maybe want to get more information, download the report, check it out for themselves, where could they go?
they can go to paloaltonetworks.com and they can find the cloud security report directly on the website.
I just want to make sure it's cloud native security report or cloud security report.
The State of Cloud Native Security is the name.
State of Cloud Native Security. I knew Cloud Native was in there. I don't want to send people and they say, they send us to the wrong place.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll provide a direct link that you can share out as well.
We'll try to get it in there. John, man, a pleasure seeing you. Sounds like a good job on this report.
Kudos.
Thanks, Alan. Good to talk to you as always.
All right. I still see that LSU Tiger helmet there, man.
That's right.
You must be happy your boys are in the Super Bowl, huh?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely more interested in watching it now, for sure.
Absolutely. Hey, man, I'll talk to you soon, John.
Take care, Alan. Thanks.
All right. John Murillo, Palo Alto Prisma Cloud, here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have the Haunted Hacker Podcast. This is the first part of a two-part conversation that Mike Jones has with Vidya Sakar, who is the Senior Security Service Engineer over at Microsoft. They talk about a number of topics, including the future of mankind, AI, technology, diversity, friendships, hardships, and so much more. It's a great conversation. As always, Mike has really fascinating conversations with his guests. This is no exception, so let's go ahead and roll it now.
Welcome, everybody, to the Haunted Hacker Podcast number. Dia, what do you want to give it?
417.
417. And before the show, she let me know that was her lucky number. Maybe she'll tell us about that later. It's been a busy week. It's been a busy new year. And thankfully, no incident responses since last year, knock on wood. A little bit of news. I'll be speaking at Techstrong Predict, recording that session this week. And I will be speaking with Chris Roberts, Luke McComey, and Mike Weber for the Tuesday Morning Grind in February, which just came to fruition today. So it looks like that's a go. Other than that, not a whole lot. Expecting some bad weather, snow. I'm sure more waves of Omicron. So sit tight and be safe. So today we have Dia, and she's from Microsoft, one of my favorite tech giants that keeps me employed. So why don't you tell us about yourself and kind of your background? You have a really unique background, and kind of your journey and how you got to cyber. And thanks for being on the show as well. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out. That was actually kind of a nice surprise that you were interested. So that's kind of neat. I do have a really interesting background, and I think it speaks to the kinds of various backgrounds that we need in cybersecurity. I started out, I'm going to actually go way back to where I started. So I was born as Vidya Chandrasekhar, and my name Vidya means knowledge and wisdom in Sanskrit. So it was put into me, it was programmed into me from a very young age that I was going to be a continuous lifelong learner. And that's a good thing, because that actually is what set me on this track. As I was growing up, I was in a dance family that's similar to a military family, but with a little more, of the kind of mental anguish of having to be judged by everyone when you're on stage, which is great. And then I think all of the students of my mom's dance school, which is the oldest dance school in the United States that teaches classical Indian dance. It started back in the late 60s. I think everybody walks away with two things. One, we know how to improvise, and one, we know how to choreograph. And I think those two things are very valuable skills in life, because you're always going to have those spontaneous moments where you have to make a quick decision. And once you make that decision, sometimes you just have to MacGyver everything together to make it work. And sometimes, especially in incident response, it's all choreography. It's like, who does what information do we need? What resources do we need? What's the order of operations? How do we get things out there? Oh, the customer's joining the call. Okay, now let's make sure we follow the script, right? So a lot of that is very similar to choreography. And I'm really blessed that I had that background from the time I was kind of basically born. Growing up then, I got into, a few different things. Dabbled in beauty pageants, won a few of those. Then I became a really good dancer. I mean, I'm really happy that I was able to prove myself while I was still able to. I danced 48 hours and then 72 hours to break my world record. And that was all solo dancing with live orchestras performing along with me. And it was all done at the Barthia Temple in Troy, Michigan. I'm a Detroit girl. And so it was a really special time back then. Unfortunately, by the second time, when I did the second one, I was raising funds and awareness about heart health. And so it was money that I was raising for the American Heart Association. My father had just passed away from a couple of heart attacks and a stroke. And so knowing about, what those root causes are that cause ailment is another thing that I think that became useful to me in my cyber career. Like, you always need to try and delve into what those root causes are and how do we actually address those and prevent them if possible before we even get there, right? So that became a passion of mine. And then, I was in television by then. I was working in TV. That was my first job out of college. I went to journalism school and graduated with an award, did journalism and peace and complex studies. I have to say the best thing I learned was from a teacher I had who was also a journalist, Armand Gebert. He taught us that, it's not enough to just spit out what you learn. It's really important to go back, double check, find multiple sources, verify what you think you know. And then, to really be thorough and accurate when you're communicating with others. And I think that's, again, another very lucky thing that happened to me that I learned from him and I take with me. I have to say it's been a bunch of really great teachers and then great mentors to get me where I am. Because it was never like, this was back in the 80s, right? I couldn't have been like, I want to be an incident response person right back in the 80s. Like, that wasn't even a thing on my radar as, a dancing girl from Detroit. So I think over time, it was just one experience after another as computers started to become part of our lives. I remember we had to build a machine at home. And, all the little things that we learned, oops, you can't do it that way, right? All that ends up becoming part of what you learn about how things work. It's not just something you read about or people tell you. It's like legitimately you've connected things yourself. Right. So I think all that was really valuable. But when I decided to make the shift from non-tech to tech, that was an interesting thing too. It actually happened consistent with my second world record. So I was working for this amazing company, Fendell. Amazing because I just really loved the people there and the opportunities that they gave me. And I was working back then as a recruiter. And I think I chose that because I wanted to figure out, like, what is this? What are all the things you can do in tech? Right? Like, there's so many choices. Like, you can't just be like, everybody I talked to had different buzzwords. And I was like, what are all those things? So I basically used my journalism hat and asked a whole bunch of questions and learned a whole lot of things and wound up as a PM and, eventually wound up as a PM somewhere. And as I was working on a project there, we had an incident where I'd been working for a little while, traveling around from city to city. And I was in New Jersey at the time. There's this great guy I was working with. And then all of a sudden I got an email that was titled "I Love You," and I was like, "Oh God, did I send the wrong signals? What was that?" And then, as you know, now
I love you, virus.
Yes. And that, of course, opened the door for me to start looking at this a little more. Like what are the ways in which we need to protect people and companies and defend them from these kinds of things that really get out of hand quickly. So I've been really fortunate that way. I've been affected by a few things, I think, that make security a calling and a passion more than a job in an industry that I work in, or even a career. And I think the reasons probably go back to my besties when I was 12, 13, 14, they used to come down from Toronto and stay with us, for the whole summer. And we pretended we were cousins. We used to hang out. We were 5 girls. And we would all dance and sing and everything. And then they got on a plane to go to India for the winter break. And I think it was winter break. No, it was in August. I think it was August. Yeah. But they got on a plane to go to India and I didn't get to go. And then the plane blew up over Cork County, Ireland. It was the first terrorist attack in Canada on a plane.
Yeah.
It was the Air India Kanishka incident. And I think it affected me because I just wanted to do something in life where whatever I did had to be meaningful, and it had to be something where nobody else would go through all those things that I had to feel after I lost them.
Right.
And I know that we can't prevent people from experiencing loss. But anything we can do to do preventive measures to try and defend people from not just losing their lives, but also it's really hard when you lose property. Someone steals your car, someone takes money out of your bank account, someone steals your identity. It's really hard. It's the same kind of I guess the coping mechanisms and the stages of loss that you go through. I think all of that is very similar. And, even just the shock factor when you find out something like that has happened, it's very hard on every human being.
For sure.
And so I think it's become a goal of mine to try and do whatever possible to reduce that kind of feeling for as many people as possible. And probably why Microsoft, because I chose it. I left for a short time in between. I came right back because it's just got this big footprint and there's so many people, so many different, enterprises and industries and their families and everybody that's connected to Windows in one way or another, or to Xbox, or to any of the services that we offer. I think it really makes a difference that I can be here and do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you touch on a lot of things that really resonate with me. The fact of wanting to learn and a lifelong learner. I tell people that I got into this industry because there's no way I'll ever know everything about cybersecurity. And so every day I'm learning something new. And I encourage everybody to, take the time out during the day and maybe research something that you've never researched before and expand that knowledge base.
Absolutely agree.
That and, just giving back. I think that most people that find a position in our industry and go with it, it becomes a passion. And I think it has a lot to do with being able to give back and help people. Our industry is one of those industries where you're not necessarily dealing with the end consumer all the time, but you're affecting them in some way, and their lives and their families. So Microsoft, great conversation. So I got introduced to Microsoft in 2005. I had a blog, and back when blogs weren't really blogs, they were just text files, and was talking about the different ways to exploit Microsoft. And so I get a call from Redmond, Washington saying, "Hey, we'd like you to come up and interview for a position." So it was a really, really interesting time. So I flew up to Redmond. It's during the raining season. I get off a plane, and Microsoft had me a rental car, which happened to be a leaky convertible. That was great. But what I found really interesting about Microsoft was they were less interested on my knowledge base and more interested in problem solving and the way that my mind worked. I remember going into one of the program manager's offices during the interview, and she had a really cluttered office. She looks at me, she says, "Your only test during this part of the interview is I'm thinking of an object in the room, and it's your job to figure out what that object is by asking the least amount of questions." And I thought, wait a minute, am I in the Twilight Zone? Why are they wanting to know this? But every part of it was kind of like a challenge. Lunch, they came and asked me what I like to eat. And I said, well, I'm from Texas, so I enjoy steak. So they took me to a vegan restaurant. It was just, it seemed like a lot of ways to challenge you and see how you handle adversity, see how you problem solve, and just the way your mind works in general. And I'll never forget getting into the self-driving car and going from one part of the campus to another with no driver on a schedule for different meetings. And I thought, this place is definitely like the movies. Like, this is really cool. But I joke a lot because I tell people Microsoft keeps me employed. It kept me employed as a pen tester, kept me employed as a security analyst. And the job that I went there for was really unique because it was a program manager over code scrubbers. And basically they would scrub the code, come to me, give me the results, and I would decide either to release the code or to put it back in production. And in my young mind at that time, I thought, this is a lose-lose situation. I let it walk out the door, get exploited. Guess who's to blame? I put it back in production. We don't make the release date. Guess who's to blame? So at the time, I didn't. Lose. Yeah. I was catch-22. So at the time, I didn't think that was the route that I should go. But the experience, it was huge for me because back then, not anybody and everybody was being asked to go to the Revan campus for interviews. And it's a very select place, just like Google and Apple. The tech giants tend to be very protective about their processes as far as hiring and stuff like that. But I met some brilliant people there, and I still keep in touch with them. So, knowing Microsoft is a big target industry, and hackers are always going after Microsoft. And granted, you've got some great job stability with Microsoft. But what is your view? What is your take on Microsoft being that huge target along with Apple and Google? How does that make you feel? And does that make you lose sleep at night, maybe?
I'm lucky to lose sleep at night for other reasons. I deal with autoimmune disease. And so luckily that's my reason for losing sleep.
I'm with you on that.
But no, I don't. I think we turned a corner. And I think it's really about being effective in terms of, it's not a great word to use, but it's actually an effective word. It's hygiene, right? Get the fundamentals right. And I think ever since the SDL came out, Adam Shostak's threat modeling came out, ever since all of those processes were put into place and people started really kind of paying attention to it. Like when I came in, it was 2006 when I joined Microsoft. And yeah, I had a puzzle too, and we're not supposed to have puzzles by then anymore. But when I joined, I think you're right. The culture was a little more competitive and, we were a large target and there was just a lot of stress. And I feel like the shift in top-down management style and the approach of we're going to make mistakes, but we have to learn from them and continuously grow, that whole hit refresh concept. I think it's been growing and we've been evolving with it. And so I feel like even from a resource perspective, we have a variety of different people with different types of ways of thinking about things. And when you have that diverse crowd come together and try to problem solve, even in a difficult situation, you find that those solutions start to emerge, the options start to emerge quickly. And really, that's what you want in any situation. You want options. Yeah, we're always being attacked. I mean, that's just, a known thing. But then what human is not, right? We've got germs coming at us all the time, right? Not all of them are going to end up with us becoming very sick. As long as we know how to adapt and be ready to respond to something that does, that actually puts us in a better place. And we've actually seen how that's happened over the last couple of years with the pandemic as well. So I think you could kind of align those two things in some way and kind of look at an approach. And I think that approach over time has also come from the fact that as a company, there are leaders that share their recommended kind of reading with us. So we know what they're thinking about. It's not a secret. It's not something that suddenly gets put down on us. It's like, hey, we've been reading these things. They appear in the MS library. We have our own internal library. And so you can kind of track and read what they're looking at, see their point of view and see how they're looking at our goals and how they're looking at protecting what we have. Some of the things that we thought were important to protect back then, today they're not so relevant. We're opening up, we're embracing open source, we're embracing so many other communities now, and we're far deeper into gaming today than we were back in 2005, 2006. So I feel like it's important for not just the company to evolve, but for the company to help the resources evolve as well. The humans need to continually evolve. So when I think about what the attacks are going to look like in the future, I know where we are today, right? But if you plan for today, that's not really proactive. That's just, hey, this is the trend. Here's where we are today. That's great. What's the future like? So I think about that a lot, right? I mean, we're so close to quantum computing. We're minutes away, literally, right? If you look at the grand scheme of things, we're getting closer to more automation, artificial intelligence. You mentioned self-driving cars. What about self-driving cargo trucks and planes at some point, right? We already use autopilot flights these days, but there's going to be so much more of that. It's interesting. I had a manager for a while. Since he was my manager, he left the company, became a billionaire with his own startup, and then pandemic hit, and he found himself working in an Amazon warehouse. So now he's a podcast, and he's talking about that whole experience, which I find fascinating because he said in his trailer, he said, or is it first episode or trailer? I'm not sure, but he did mention, he said at some point with all the automation and all the robotics and all the artificial intelligence, Amazon warehouse might end up being the number one job that everybody in the US has at that point. I was like, oh, that's a different way of thinking of life. Like if that were to happen, then what would I do? Because, as a disabled person, that's not something I can do. I've got to figure out, like, then how would I pivot? So I think looking at the future, thinking about every sci-fi outcome possible allows you to just plan ahead and kind of figure out how you're going to pivot in that situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. The AI and ML and all the futuristic type, technology, is not so futuristic. When you look at movies that came out in the past, let's take Minority Report for one.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought that we would have those displays where you can guide things with your hands and dig into a database just by a touch?
I did because I wanted that. Honestly,
yes.
I'm lazy. I was like, why do we still have screens? Where's my hologram, people? Where's my hoverboard? I want these things.
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. And what's funny is the whole time that I'm watching these movies, I'm thinking that's going to happen one day. I did a talk in London about 1984, the actual novel, and how it relates to current times and what we've seen, how we've surpassed by far what they would have predicted back then. And I started talking to Chris Roberts yesterday about quantum computing and some of the things that we're on the edge. We're like right on the brink of making some huge discoveries and some huge advancements. But I think what is most important and what's going to get us there is something you mentioned earlier, and it's communication and people. All this automation, all the robots and technology, it's all great. It's going to help us live a better life and give us more free time and more ability to spend time with people. But I think what's most important is communication and relationships, because the machines and the code can't build that bridge between people. Yeah, it can provide the technology in order to get in contact with those people and make that, that possible. But it's those relationships, I think, that are the most important when it comes to advancement in technology.
I think the important word, though, is yet. So, it reminds me of that time when there were the two AI that were built by Amazon, I think, and they started talking to each other in their own machine code because it was just more efficient than using English. And people couldn't understand it anymore. So they, like that's the whole thing we have to think about. It's like if they start to think for themselves, at what point are all the thoughts that we have things that, for us, we have a combination within us of both the electricity and the chemistry, right? We have the chemicals within us as well. And if we are shifting to organic substances and computing, at what point is it that the robot will also have feelings like us? Like I think about those movies too. So when I think about communication, like it just takes me back to when I was in high school, Mercy High School, Farmington Hills, Michigan. Yay. When I was in high school though, I took a coding class, and the first thing the teacher told us is it's just communicating. It's just a different language. You're just going to learn how to communicate in a different language. It's just like your French class, your Spanish class. This is the grammar. You're going to learn the syntax. You're going to learn how to do things, how to say things, and then the machine's going to do what you tell it to do. And I guess looking at it from such a relaxed perspective allowed me to kind of learn things easier that way, but also look to the future for like, yeah, we're going to communicate with them. We're going to build relationships. I mean, I have a relationship with my phone. I don't know how you feel, but I can't put it down. If that's not a relationship, I don't know what is. Right?
Yeah. Well, I've got a relationship with my Amazon device sitting here. It's a love-hate relationship, but we deal with it day by day. But you brought up a really interesting point about AI and robots, and eventually having feelings, right? So I had this talk with Max Hennemeyer from Darktrace, and I've talked to a couple of people about it. And I think before we get true artificial intelligence and before we can break that red tape, I think we have to realize what true consciousness is. And there's several theories out there. People talk about constructs and matrices and just a vast array of theories. But I look at it this way, and this is what made technology and computer networks and computers easy for me. When I look at computer networks and computers, I look at human anatomy and systems. The nervous system. You have the Ethernet cables that carry the information, which are arteries. And I just looked at everything in a medical aspect because, like yourself, I have autoimmune disease, and I think that is just a sign of our times. I think that's the environment we live in. But I developed that over the past 10 years. And I also had to have a pacemaker put in, which there's a piece of technology there that I had to learn to understand and to be okay with. But I think we're going to see a lot more of those types of advancements, in the near future. I mean, we have clothing for the military that is able to take, stats as far as, vitals and stuff like that. And that, to me, that type of technology amazes me. And not only does it amaze me, but it gives me hope that, the conditions that we have now, we can live a lot longer with the aid of technology. And I think it's coming. I think we're right there.
I agree with you, and I hope so. Like I've been looking into exoskeletons and other possible technologies that would enable me to dance again without having to use a cane or sit in a chair, because it was so much a part of my life. And I taught for a long time until recently, until the pandemic, actually. And the thing is, I'd love to dance again. Like, who wouldn't? I'd love to run again. I used to run 6 miles a day. It was my thing. I loved it. I'd love to just feel that breeze in my hair as I'm going by, And I just have these things in my head that I'd love to experience. I feel like if technology can enable me and anyone else to do those things, if it can enable people who can't see to be able to understand what visions look like, and people can't hear be able to understand and enjoy music. I mean, what a great thing we've done. But at the same time, I think about the good side, and then I think about how are we going to misuse that? Because I lived through the early 90s when the first few things came online after Mosaic, right? And the internet was for porn. And it was not built for it originally, but that's where it went. During those early years, like some of the best developments and advancements in technology were happening with the adult industry. Even today in robotics, they are leading the way, right? So things are always going to be used in a way that they were not expected to be used, right? Like pencil eraser is supposed to erase pencil marks. We put them in the of our earrings when they're falling out, right? I mean, things are always going to be used in a different way. And so from the perspective of like security, it's like, how are we going to then make sure that that different use of that thing is not going to be abuse, right?
Right.
How are we going to make sure that's not going to harm somebody?
And I think that's a really good and valid point. And I think that the answer lies with the people who manipulate the technology. I tell people in the industry all the time is that instead of blackballing hackers and not giving them employment or saying they're bad people, how about embracing their culture? Because those are the people who are making the true innovations. The term hacker has gotten such a bad negative feel to it because of the media and because of the government. But when you really look at it, we've always taken devices or technology and tried to manipulate it, not only to do bad things, but to do things to suit what we want them to do or a function that we want to happen. And I think if industry would embrace that, I guess, that mentality and that personality a little bit more, the sky's the limit as far as innovation goes.
I would totally agree. Actually, everybody and everything hacks, right? And going back to consciousness, I'm thinking about how just recently certain animals, I think there were some sea animals that were recently deemed to be sentient beings. Sentient, is that how you pronounce it?
Sentient, yeah.
Sentient beings. So that's an interesting thing, because then, like, at what point will we decide, the computer can think and have feelings and it has a consciousness? We haven't decided what that measurement is yet, and we're still even deciding like whether something's a planet or not. So we have a long way to go in terms of measurement and naming things. But
absolutely, it reminds me of that movie.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It reminds me of that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, and he had the relationship with the AI, and it was a true relationship. But that stuff always amazes me, and just to think about the interaction between a human and an AI. But I'm really interested in the core fundamentals of AI, like how do we take Bayes' algorithm and predict future events, or how do we take technology and determine what's a true level of consciousness, and are we seeing the same thing? Because my reality may be completely different than somebody else's. And
that's interesting. Perception is, there's that theory that everybody has their own reality. I'm just glad that our realities met today,
Yeah, exactly.
We're all living in our own world. That's interesting. I have this other theory though, where and I think a lot of people have talked about this theory that, we are in the matrix,
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, we are back. Next up, we have a Open Mainframe, the Open Mainframe series that we have here on Techstrong TV. This one is a rerun. It is the predictions for 2022 broadcast, or whatever you want to call it. But in this one, Alan and John Murtick, who's the Director of Program Management over at the Linux Foundation, they discuss some of their predictions for the year with leaders of 3 of the Open Mainframe's most mature and popular projects. So this one features Kip Twitchell from IBM, Peter Fannell from Rocket Software, and Sue Harsana Srinivasan, also from IBM. It is a great conversation, especially for those in the mainframe space. Definitely a lot of takeaways for you. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hey everyone, This is Alan Schimmel. Welcome to another episode of the Open Mainframe. The Open Mainframe is a monthly video project done by us here at Techstrong Group and Techstrong TV in conjunction with our friends at the Linux Foundation and the Open Mainframe project. Let me introduce you to today's panel, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about. First up, I want to introduce you to Peter Fendell. Peter, welcome. Peter, if you briefly want to just give people a little bit of your background.
Hi. This is Peter Fendell. I'm Director of Product Management for all open source on the mainframe at Rocket Software. And I've been involved in open source on the mainframe for about 10 years. And before that, process control, factory automation, and network management software is my domain.
Great. Next up, I want to introduce you to a woman who's been on our show before, and she was nice enough to come back, which is always good. Let me introduce you now to, and I do my best with her name. It's not one that's easy for me, but I try. Sudarsana Srinivasan. Close?
Very good. Very good, Alan. I am from IBM. I'm an IBM Z Influencer Program Manager. What that is I drive advocacy and engagement with the community, and I'm really happy to be part of Open Mainframe project from a COBOL programming course point of view.
Absolutely. Last, not last, but our third panel member is Kip Twitchell. Kip, welcome. A little background?
Thanks, Alan. Glad to be here today. I'm a consultant in financial systems, been doing consulting work on building financial systems, had involvement in the mainframe for 30 years now. I'm the technical steering committee chair for the Geneva ERS project, and I run the OpenZ OS enablement, the Aussie project on the Open Mainframe. I've been involved in open source on the mainframe now for a couple of years. Starting with those two projects.
Great. Kip, I know what it's like to say you've been in something for 30 years. Well, so I appreciate it very much. Last but not least, let me introduce you to my co-host on the Open Mainframe project. He also, when he's not busy on our video show, is the director or general manager for the Open Mainframe project for Linux Foundation, John Murdo. Hey, John, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. And as we were talking about in the pre-show, it's a little cold here, but you're not complaining where you're at.
No. This is the time of year we call people who live up,
north and say, hey, how's the weather? Anyway, guys, we pressed for time today because I know Peter might have to drop out video-wise, and so I want to jump into things. We do the Open Mainframe show, as I mentioned, monthly. We've been doing it for most of the year. This is the December show, so it's our end-of-year special. And I wanted to take December to kind of take stock of where we've been, where we're going to in terms of the Open Mainframe project itself, which, of course, is an umbrella for 20-some-odd or more different projects. And, take stock of where it's been and where it's going. Peter, because time is short with you, I want to jump right to you and get ask you to kick it off
with what
sure thank
you have.
Yeah, I feel like it's been an important year in open source on the mainframe, and next year even more so, and I'll tell you why that is. I think if you look at what happened this year for Zoe, and I'm going to focus mostly on Zoe, it makes a compelling story if you look at it in the context of the 3-year history of Zoe. So 2019, Zoe was introduced in January of that year. To be frank, Zoe was more of a beta program, had a lot of issues, but it got quick excitement and buzz generated for what it represented as a technological leap in how you interface with the mainframe. And 2020 was more of a graduation to MVP, true MVP status. They resolved through the Cupids project issues with relating to upgrades, installation. The community of developers matured and organized itself. And importantly, there were some commercial 24/7 support products introduced in 2020, which made it possible for enterprise customers to adopt it for development. But there were still some missing features required for putting it into production. And that's really what the story is for 2021 in terms of what we accomplished. We implemented high availability fault tolerance support. We implemented containerization. We introduced a conformance program for support products so that if you're a company that wants to go into production with Zoe, you want 24/7 support. You want to be able to you want to be able to have a confidence that the support product you're buying has been vetted and meets certain norms. So that leads me to my prediction for 2021, which is it's going to be all about deployments into production. And that's what I see. And, it's not only Zoe, we're also seeing this in our open source porting business, where there's been a significant uptick in customers who have been buying support. They've been using it, but not paying for support because they didn't need to. But now they're saying, hey, we're putting this into production. We need to buy support. And so that's really what it looks like from my seat.
You know what? Experience has shown me, Peter, that when you sell support with a product and people don't use it, it means one of two things. One is your product is really, really easy and intuitive and amazing that people just, don't need it. And that's rare, let's face it. Or it's shelfware. They're playing with it, but it's not mission critical. It's not in production. It's not, it's a science experiment. And you're right. So if you're seeing a pickup in support, that generally indicates that now people are putting it through its paces.
Now people are starting to use it.
Another data point that speaks to that is that we've had 45,000 downloads of the developer environment for Zoe. And so, I view that as a very strong leading indicator. They've been developing thousands of developers have been developing now for well over a year. So we got stuff getting ready to go into production.
Excellent. Very cool. And thanks for that update. If it's okay, Sudarsana, I'd like to turn to you. In many ways, COBOL has had a renaissance with COVID because, all of a sudden we needed all these COBOL programmers to update unemployment systems and other sort of industrial programs that we all depend on. We just didn't realize how much we depend on them. We've seen a lot of education initiatives coming from Linux Foundation and Open Mainframe projects. What have you seen in your role?
Absolutely. Very valid, right? COBOL has always been there. It has always been an integral part of our everyday lives. But what COVID did is turn the spotlight on COBOL. If we were to step back to a time that we may or may not remember, which is pre-COVID, our teams were already really busy working on this brand new COBOL programming course. And when COVID hit, that is when suddenly there was all this requirement and need, and everybody wanted to skill up on this new language that suddenly was, the buzzword of the day. And COBOL was on the spotlight. I remember the date when we landed the COBOL programming course on Open Mainframe project, April 14th, 2020. It was an amazing day. We landed the course, and in less than a month, over 100,000 views of the course, right? The traffic on Open Mainframe project, just amazing. Goes to show how much the community has come together. Since then, we've had over 8,000, close to now 9,000 learners on our system doing the COBOL course. Peter mentioned several downloads. several downloads of Zoe. And in fact, the COBOL programming course has that modern tooling and interface. So we use VS Code and Zoe. So Zoe is sort of our sister project here that we really leverage and tap into in teaching COBOL programming course, because that was one of our core missions as well, bringing that modernization to that learning process. So fast forward to 2021, there's been a lot that has happened. We've mobilized and we've built a lot of momentum around COBOL education. So in a nutshell, I think 2022 is going to be all about capitalizing on this momentum that we've built. And I certainly see it as a year of continued growth with COBOL training and COBOL education. The need is always there. The skills and the need is there. It is growing. And I think us building and as a team, our focus on building out more on the COBOL content is going to be pivotal and sort of the right path forward.
Excellent. I don't disagree. Kip, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn to you and maybe an update on the project. Well, you're on multiple things, but an update on what you're seeing this past year and where we're going.
You know, Alan, when I was contemplating a prediction show, I thought, okay, so predictions, fortunately, most people don't go back and review prediction shows later to see how accurate you were in the predictions. That's kind of a good thing. But there is one prediction that in the last couple of years I have reviewed, and it's one that probably this guy's mostly known for. Stuart Alsop in 1993, he predicted on March 15th of 1996 the last mainframe would be turned off. Right?
Really?
Yeah, and if you go to his Wikipedia page, it mentions that prediction. I mean, might be the most famous thing this guy was known for. I mean, he had a great career, did lots of great work, and he's mostly remembered because he predicted the last mainframe would have been turned off. This last March 15th, it would have been 25 years since the predicted death of the mainframe.
Yeah, another pundit bites the dust.
So I hope that my predictions aren't reviewed in that same way 25 years from now as being so off the mark, right? Mm-hmm. The space that I'm looking at, that we've had a really good year from the Geneva ERS perspective, becoming an active project. We started a year and a half ago on being released. We have really about a 20-year history, a 25-year history of doing kind of open source work because we came from a consulting practice. We weren't a commercial software package. We went in to solve problems for customers, and when they had particular problems that couldn't be solved, we would add features into Geneva ERS, and we continually provided support for customers. We've supported customers continuously now for 25 years, had production applications. And the applications are around core financial management when it comes to support, like Peter was talking about, right? And the mainframe, you just can't, we don't stand for these key business systems to be down for hours and days at a time. And so support and the error rates on the mainframe, the lack of error rates, the thing that it runs so bulletproof is what keeps these systems. That's why Stuart was wrong, is that they continue running. The thing that's interesting to me is seeing open source come full circle, right? You have Share 1955. Well, we had a large development of commercial packages and proprietary systems. It's interesting to watch it come full circle because of the innovation that comes around open source communities, just like this conversation right here. It attracts people and development of community and such, and that's really what's renewing the mainframe. So I think this renewal is going to continue, but you got some changes there that have to happen on the commercial side of things, where people that are still involved in their livelihood on the commercial side of the platform, if they fear open source, if they can't engage others in the community and find a way of growing that set, the mainframe won't continue to grow. It's a big ask of this legacy environment to adopt the kinds of things that require open source to renew these systems. So, as a prediction, you can see the trends I've found in my own work in consulting. Predicting the trend is not as hard. Predicting timing is very difficult. So, will we, on ZOS specifically, that's one of the operating systems on the mainframe as opposed to Z-Linux. Z-Linux came from an open source sort of world. ZOS is still not in that as much in that open source world, and yet a great deal of the workloads around these business systems sit on ZOS. Are we going to find ways of impacting those systems? COBOL is a great example, the open source community around COBOL, but are we going to find ways of making application differences for companies to renew these systems, to find ways of sharing that data, to find new applications for these business systems? Those are really where we're continuing to work, and it'll be interesting to see what the next year brings.
John, that sounds like, someone should take that as a mission.
Right. It's an interesting theme that I hear here is it's not necessarily about big bang, whiz bang, because all three of these folks here, they all represent projects which are active, mature projects. But if you think about what they're saying we're refining that maturity. We're refining who we are. We're refining what our processes and our impacts, and we're listening to users. And, if you take a step back and sort of think about it, those are the pieces that helps you instill trust into what you're using. There's millions of pieces of open source, billions of pieces of open source code software out there. And the differentiator we've always seen between, the masses and maybe the few is there are some that are really very critically important to our society, and they're critically important in different areas, and businesses is heavily invested in them. And what helps bring people to a point where they're trusting open source is the exact investments of time that you see Kip and Sudharsha and Peter talking about that are happening in their respective projects, is building out that maturity, building out that area of how do we refine our value to the end user? How do we refine what we're doing? And how do we continue to instill trust? And if I'm listening to anything, Alan, that's what I'm hearing as a takeaway.
Absolutely. So let me put my 2 cents in. I'll throw my hat in too. Here's lessons I've learned in business over the last 30 years in business. No one does things because it's a nice to have. No one does things because, gee willikers, that's a nice group of folks over there, or this is a pretty nice company to deal with, or, I have a sentimental place in my heart for Big Iron, right? They don't. They use Z, they use mainframes because, in spite of what Stuart Alsop said 30 years ago or whatever it was, it's still dollar for dollar, penny for penny, the best bang for your buck for computing in terms of security, reliability, and scalability. And we use open source because, in spite of the ups and downs and the cathedral and the bazaars and the big brothers and the foundations and everything else, the world has come to trust open source as a valid, almost best practices way of disseminating software to the masses, to the users, to the developers, right? And that's street truth, right? You can have opinions, but there's only one truth, and that's the truth. Both of those are truths. And so when we look at 2022, if something's not going to upset that apple cart, if something is not going to fundamentally change in that equation, we're going to continue using the mainframe, the ZOS. We're going to continue learning and having to train more COBOL programmers because there's a huge need for them. We're going to continue using open source to make the mainframe stay current because it delivers the best MIP for the dollar. Right? Could Zoe be better? Yeah. Can Zoe evolve quicker? Yes. But you're also dealing with a little bit of inertia there and a little bit of just the nature of the beast, I think. You know, to Peter's point, this thing was started in 2019 only. It's a baby, right? We're only now going into 2022. We have, 40 years of mainframe, maybe 50 years of mainframe experience out there versus 2-3 years of Project Zoe, right? So, you know, I think the glass half full, the glass half empty. Peter, I know you're just on audio, but, you know, interested in your thoughts on maybe, you know, another view on that. I don't know if Peter's on with... Yeah, I mean, you know, yes, could we have done more? Could progress be faster? And frankly, Kip, I'll throw it to you as well. In your project, we could always do more, right? But as you sit here and reflect and look forward, we don't use the failure word. We don't say, oh my goodness, you know what a missed opportunity.
You know,
or do
Alan,
we?
If I could jump in, Alan, on the open source, one of the things that open source brings, it brings the immediate needs of customers right into the project much more quickly. And when that works, the turnaround time becomes much faster and the innovation is much quicker, right? If you think of these legacy systems, I've been talking for a couple of years now, these legacy financial systems, in many instances, biggest systems that run on the mainframe, there's like 2 people in the corporation that know the COBOL behind those systems. And every project goes through those two people. And there's 2 of them so that they have continuous support.
One supports the other, but yeah.
And these things, they have to run all the time. You know, when you're making airline reservations, when you're doing banking transactions, these things run all the time. But these people, because of their specialization, they've become isolated in that they get questions from people all the time about how do we get data out of your system? How do we do this? How do we do that? If you could get them connected to like-minded people who are running a similar system in another organization, they're going to like open their eyes. They won't miss that call. If you have that call monthly, they won't miss that call because they're talking to people that understand the problem that they live their whole life with, that they're passionate about, that they've built their careers on. And that's possible in an open source community rather than the siloed, isolation that COVID's driven in many respects. That open source has that ability to connect those people to talk about problems they're passionate about and to make progress and see that progress. And that's where I see that's what's happening in the Geneva ERS world. But at sometimes we don't have customers that will simply assign people that say, hey, this is permissible for you to join the open source calls on our nickel, on our time, because we want that influence. We want you knowing what the community is talking about. That's a different mindset for users. Instead of a vendor per se, they're a participant. And if they want the speed of progress that can come, there's a small investment of time that has to come from them to involvement in that.
Yep.
And just to add to that thought that Kip was talking about and having, just the 2 COBOL programmers and everyone actually going through those 2 folks, what I think the open source COBOL programming course then here really helps with is the ability and access to learning content. I mean, I agree, it's a beginner level course, and the advanced, which is part of our roadmap. And, to your point again, Alan, about, we've got to constantly keep working on it and improving, right? So that would be what we are planning for 2020 from the course point of view. But the access to this content and course here truly opens up the opportunity for anyone and everyone to be able to learn and then be able to, again, build on their skills and be an additional resource within the organization with the skill set, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely.
If I were to react, you start with that basic training in COBOL, but there's many of these principles around these large financial business systems that there's other courses that can be developed around. And for a number of years now, I've been running a vlog called Conversations with Kip. It's about financial system principles. How are these data systems? How are the business system built? What do ledgers do? All of that is building up and the next generation of people that have to come and understand this things that were automated 20 and 30 years ago and renew and refresh them. What are the new functions that we need around these things? And that's, I see the Open Mainframe project being at the forefront of that, and these courses continuing to develop and having better access and training a new group of people, because this is critical knowledge we need.
Yep, agreed. Peter, you had started before. I realize you're on audio. It's a bit of a, holding back, but wanted your thoughts on some of the discussions.
I really concur with what everybody else has been saying. It's right on.
Yeah. Let me ask you another question. Kip, you mentioned, most of these organizations, they only have 2 people who know COBOL. Is that by choice?
Well, I don't think that most of them have just 2 people that know COBOL.
No, but understand, I get it. But there's not enough. Let's put it.
There's not enough. They don't know these systems, right? It's the intersection of the data and the business functionality and the programming language and environment. All 3 of those come together in these specialized people, right? And it's grown that way in a certain sense because we were driving low cost on these systems. I mean, you think about the cost per transaction of most of our business systems, and like you talked about on the mainframe, it really, per transaction, it is incredibly low cost. It is very reliable and very low cost. We have continually driven that low cost, which in some respects hasn't talked about renewal and new functionality. I have another project that I do outside of this that's called sharealedger.org, which is talking about how, if we could share ledgers, blockchain's a little bit of that, but it's not really, it's more of a transaction system. How would it change these major business systems and what we can do around this? Because our financial data is not nearly as accessible and understood as other kinds of data that we've developed over the cloud environments in the last 20 years. How could that change our society and our knowledge and the world we live in? So it's that cost thing that's driven them to that, I think, Alan.
Yeah, I agreed. Hey, John, you've been kind of riding the bench on this one. I got to come back to you because we're running low on time. As the director here of Open Mainframe Project in total, right? There's 20 odd projects and working groups. I'm going to ask you to give us a State of the Union and your look ahead, not just on these 3, which are mature working projects and in Open Mainframe, but in the whole. What do you think? What are you seeing?
Yeah, we're at a very interesting time of a project, and we're going to be doing a blog post about this as sort of our looking forward goals and objectives as a foundation. Some of our other foundations like CNCF and CD Foundation, they make this public. We're making ours public as well. Our governing board just went through an exercise of a 5-year planning, which seems like an eternity in most open source projects, but is just a blip of time in the mainframe world. But, the thing when I talk with folks the most about the project and talk about the direction where things are going and just talk about where we've got to, it really starts to circle on how can we make the projects here more consumable, more up to the standards of this community, and really help that alignment across, the industry, or across inside the organization. one of the big challenges that I talk to with any mainframe customer is the mainframe group is sort of disconnected from the rest of the enterprise. And that's something that's a bigger thing than any of us to obviously solve. I mean, there's internal dynamics within organizations, but if our projects can help be sort of that bridge in of itself and open up those conversations, being a way that the mainframe audience can kind of get exposed better to the world of open source, because, most of the customers that we're dealing with have great OSPOs, open source program offices already, that can be leveraged and tapped into and help give them guidance. But being able so that these projects can be so better used in these organizations, kind of get to where Peter's saying of, uptick of end users, I think that's going to be just a huge thing we're going to see in the next year. And there's a lot of things from the foundation point of view that, we're going to be looking to invest in, such as education and training and, other sort of quality bits in there, because, we want these projects to be the gold standard. These communities here work tirelessly. They put tons of time and effort and their personal passions and their corporate interests into this. And we want to make sure that these projects are well suited to be positioned to be cornerstones of industry, just in the same way that projects like Kubernetes and Node.js and, even the Linux kernel have felt to as well. So I'm seeing that as sort of one big, large component that we're going to start seeing over the course of this year. And I think the other piece is continuing as a foundation to invest in the accessibility and the ability for people to build open source on the mainframe. And there's going to be a lot more to come next year on that. We'll have a great show when we have big things to announce there. But I think the big thing as we're looking forward here is, the biggest barrier that I always hear of getting some of this open source port of the mainframe is I don't have the expertise. I don't have the infrastructure. I don't have this. I don't have that. What the project can do to help knock down some of those barriers, and I think we're going to see some significant ones over the next year, is going to be crucial, and I think is going to start to see some more renewed investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey guys, we are running out on our time. I want to, first of all, thank Sudarsana, Kip, and Peter for appearing on today's panel. I want to thank John for co-hosting all of these months with us. There's some folks behind the scenes that I want to thank. I want to thank May Mallon, Maynor. If I mispronounce it, May, I apologize. I want to thank Jody Ashley. May and Jody worked tirelessly, scheduling this, getting the abstracts out, finding great people to be on our panels. I want to thank all you out here who watch this show. It's developed a bit of a following. Once a month is, it's just once a month. We'd like to do more, but we'll look at that next year as well. But, for all of you out there, first of all, happy holidays, healthy holidays, be safe. But there's so much more the work that needs to be done, that can be done, that will be done around open source and mainframes, and we hope you will join the Open Mainframe Project and the folks at Linux Foundation and the various projects under it that are working on it. But I think that's a wrap. That's a wrap on 2021, guys. Have a great joining us.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with the headlines. The first up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at some of the issues surrounding DevOps adoption. DevOps issues can be a thorny subject. The coming together in harmony of Dev and Ops represents an arranged marriage of sorts that, for some, will never have a happily ever after ending, as both parties ultimately grapple with irreconcilable differences. All this on Valentine's Day, too. But despite the naysayers, the very existence of DevOps as a portmanteau is, in many ways, a validation of the need to form a bond of tighter unity and harmony between two factions that have often been at odds with each other over the years. This article takes a closer look at the issues with the hope that organizations can harness some of the angst and turn it into positive energy for a DevOps-enriched future. Specifically, what are the 5 most contentious and sensitive DevOps issues organizations should be aware of, and how do the big issues break down? And we look at how DORA metrics can measure and improve performance. A technology company's most valuable assets are its people and data, especially data about the organization itself. By knowing what data to track over time, engineering leaders can measure how efficiently their DevOps teams are operating and enable them to maximize their value stream to deliver the best possible product to end users. DORA metrics have now become the standard for gauging the efficacy of software development teams and can provide crucial insights into areas for growth. These metrics are essential for organizations looking to modernize and those looking to gain an edge against competitors. This article delves into each metric and discusses what they can reveal about development teams. In news, Kong has updated Kong Enterprise to make it easier to collectively manage groups of APIs. In addition, the 2.7 version of Kong Enterprise adds support for real-time and event-based use cases involving open-source Kafka streaming platform and webhooks. IT teams can now also securely store secrets such as usernames or passwords, API tokens, database credentials, and private keys that might be employed to access Kong Gateway, and make use of a user interface for Kong Manager UI that makes it easier to configure the Kong OpenID Connect plugin for the Kong Gateway. Kong is making a case for a service connectivity platform that enables an IT team to manage APIs at a higher level of abstraction by integrating all Layer 4 through 7 services for both monolithic and microservices-based applications. Rather than having to manage an array of networking services and associated services in isolated silos, that layer of abstraction makes it easier to manage distributed applications that have dependencies on a wide range of APIs. All right, over on Container Journal, Tigera has added a scanning engine to its Calico Cloud service that will continuously assess images for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, in addition to managing interactions among microservices running on Kubernetes clusters. The scanning engine employs machine learning algorithms to identify and remediate both known and unknown threats, effectively making Calico Cloud also a cloud-native application protection platform. Calico Cloud is a software-as-a-service platform based on the open-source Calico Network Virtualization project. It automatically deploys Calico and additional capabilities developed by Tigera that can monitor a Kubernetes environment and enforce security policies that limit communication between specific microservices on a Kubernetes cluster. A dynamic service and threat graph provides live visualizations of communication between services, namespaces, and workloads to enable faster troubleshooting by highlighting security gaps, vulnerabilities, and performance issues. There are other security-related capabilities that collectively make it possible for IT organizations to leverage a platform infused with machine learning algorithms to create a zero-trust environment that can span a fleet of Kubernetes clusters. All right, over on Security Boulevard, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has added a new vulnerability to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, a Microsoft Windows 32K privilege escalation vulnerability known as CVE 2022-21882. The addition was based on evidence that threat actors are actively exploiting the vulnerabilities of this CVE, which the agency said carries significant risk to the federal enterprise. The security vulnerability notice was first released by Microsoft on January 11th and only added to the CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog on February 4th. The deadline for organizations to remediate this vulnerability is February 18th, according to CISA. And we take a look at some data discovery best practices for enterprises. The amount of data organizations are collecting and processing is growing at an exponential rate. And with privacy regulations stronger than ever, organizations need to find a way to govern this data before it becomes overwhelming. Data is the largest and most valuable asset an organization has in this day and age, and privacy regulations are in place to make sure that organizations are responsible custodians. Privacy laws such as the CCPA and GDPR give consumers the ability to exercise rights on their data and help enforce these rights. One of the most popular rights is the consumer's ability to make a data subject access request. Easy for me to say. An organization is obligated to fulfill these requests within a certain time frame, and failure to do so could result in heavy fines and penalties for the organization. An organization potentially has millions of data records pertaining to these consumers, and fulfilling these requests requires the organization discovers and classifies all that data in a way that simplifies the process. This article offers up some data discovery and classification best practices that can help an organization navigate its exponential data growth. And finally, in recognition of Valentine's Day, we have an article that offers up 5 ways to avoid heartbreak from Valentine's Day hacks. In the run-up to February 14th, 2021, last year, cyber attackers launched more than 400 new Valentine's Day-themed phishing emails targeting innocent users every week, a 29% increase over the previous year. Heartless hackers are now deploying a bigger-than-ever arsenal of Valentine's Day scams, including phishing emails and fake e-greeting cards filled with malware, phony florist websites that steal credit card information, and dozens of other tricks. Cybercriminals long ago figured out that most people are less guarded around holidays when they are festive and busy, so the bad actors escalate their attacks at these times. But all is not lost. This article lists 5 ways organizations can protect their business from Valentine's Day heartache. All right, that's it for the headlines. Clearly, I need another cup of tea, so I'm going to go get that now. Meanwhile, I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll see you on Thursday with some more headlines. Be safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Ben Smith, who is the field CTO with NetWitness. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it.
Charlene, it's my great pleasure. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the security implications to what everybody is calling the Great Resignation. But before we get started with that, I was wondering if you could introduce us to NetWitness. What are you guys all about?
Yeah, sure. NetWitness is a threat detection and response platform. So we help organizations determine if there are bad actors on the network or on your endpoints or on your other network devices. NetWitness has actually been around for almost 2 decades, believe it or not. And we're a business unit of RSA Security, which has been around for over 40 years. RSA, of course, I would argue humbly, responsible for enabling e-commerce on the internet today. 20 years, 40 years, I've only, air quotes, only been at RSA for 12 years. But it's been a great ride and continues to be. The industry definitely looks different today, Charlene, than it did even a decade ago.
Yeah, I remember the early days at RSA and attending the RSA conference back when, that was just kind of a small industry event. and now it is the behemoth that it is. And RSA certainly is one of the biggest names in security, and certainly sets the standard for so many organizations. So good stuff. And 12 years, it's like baby years, right? So good for you, though. That's great. So tell me a little bit about the Great Resignation and the cybersecurity implications thereof, because it seems like at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was kind of freaking out about what I hate to say it, but where they would be in 6 months and or a year, and I think there was a lot of soul searching that happened during that time, and that ultimately has kind of resulted in kind of this Great Resignation. People understanding that they don't really have to stay at their jobs if they don't really like it, and and I think companies have been kind of slow to react, if you will, because they're just. First, I think the first wave was like, okay, now we're just separating the wheat from the chaff. These people didn't really want to work in the first place. And now it's kind of become, well, now our biggest, best employees are finding work elsewhere. And, they're not really, organizations aren't really, they're reacting, or they haven't reacted as quickly as they could have. And part of that is the cybersecurity implications of these masses of people leaving. So what are you guys seeing in the space right now as it pertains to cybersecurity and these masses of employees resigning and moving to other jobs?
Yeah, so there's a couple of angles, Charlene. When you have somebody leave one organization, he or she joins another organization. So there's kind of an exit and an entry angle. One of the important we like to kind of talk to our customers about is, especially for folks who are on the way out, there's some pretty good research that's been run out of CERT, which is associated with Carnegie Mellon up in Pittsburgh. They've been working on this question 15, 20 years around insider risk and insider threat. And it's pretty well demonstrated at this point that the most dangerous 60 days in terms of an employee or a consultant potentially taking stuff with them as they're leaving are the 30 days before notice is served, and then the 30 days after termination. That's not necessarily a contiguous 60 days. And that second example, 30 days after termination, they shouldn't have access to stuff. Well, in some cases, that's not quite the case. So just because you have somebody who might have been with your organization for a long time or a short time and they've chosen to leave doesn't automatically make them a threat. But one of the places we've seen organizations kind of stumble when, in hindsight, some of those employees did turn out to be threats was poor internal communications between the information security team, that might be your InfoSec team, it might be your security operations center or your SOC, between those groups and human resources. HR has a lot of very valuable information about employees, including the fact that employees might be on a particular plan for improvement. Maybe an employee has put in their notice, pardon me. And sometimes those organizations don't talk to one another internally. So there's an insider risk angle to when folks leave. And again, I want to be careful. I'm not casting a wide net. The vast majority of folks who leave one organization and join another have goodness in their heart. They don't take anything with them. The other angle in the second direction, Charlene, I just wanted to touch on, really relates to culture. Employees leave one organization for another for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's looking for a new challenge. Sometimes it's, I love everybody except my boss, so I have to get out of here. And sometimes it's, I'm just not happy with the culture generally. And while it doesn't sound like I'm talking about a cybersecurity point here, culture has a very important role to play when you start to talk about security awareness. Every organization today, even down to the smallest organizations, realize they might even be compelled, depending upon their industry, to have some sort of a formal security awareness program, trainings that get rolled out, hopefully more than one time, maybe on an annual basis, to their employees. And I've done a lot of advising around awareness programs that have worked really well. And I've seen a lot of awareness programs that don't work well. And interestingly enough, Charlene, culture tends to be the common thread there.
Interesting. So, when we're talking about culture, what specifically do we mean by that? Are we talking about just kind of a lackadaisical attitude that is pervasive throughout the organization with regards to cybersecurity, or is it something altogether different?
Yeah, there is that component. There's kind of what's the overall mindset towards following and being compliant with the rules. If you're in an organization that forbids the use of things like USB drives or external hard drives, do you use those devices? Some organizations have the rule, but they don't necessarily have the means to prevent the behavior. In worst case, they might not even have the means to monitor for that behavior. So my experience, the more rules you have, sometimes the more technology that you need. Culturally speaking, as we think specifically about security awareness, one of the places where I have seen very consistently companies fail is when they use their security awareness program like a hammer. They use it very negatively. They punish folks who may have made, in most cases, do make perfectly honest mistakes. I have been that person who clicked on the wrong link, maybe more than once in my career. I suspect most of us have done that. And in some cultures, employees, even a well-meaning employee, even your A-player employee who you absolutely want to keep, may be nervous about even putting his or her hand up to say, hey, I may have just done something, but I'm not sure. In cultures that are using that hammer to punish someone who has made an honest mistake, that's not a good culture in the long run. That can actually be a driver to encourage that employee or those employees to leave the organization, not today, not tomorrow, but in the long term. So it's a very natural instinct, if you're on the hammer side of that equation, to say, I've found a problem, I'm going to fix it right now. And the way I fix it is I have a one-on-one with this person, or I put them through remedial training. Take a more beneficial approach and welcome it as an opportunity to educate your employee. And here's the really important thing: assure your employee, give him or her credit for putting up his or her hand to say, I might have done something wrong. I'm not sure. I'm nervous. Can you help me? A good culture recognizes that as an opportunity to pat them on the back and to thank them for their service. Great security cultures, Charlene, are the ones that every employee realizes that it's not just the security operations center's job to keep the organization and its intellectual property safe. Every employee is on the front lines, and those employees that feel comfortable and confident in reporting even something that might turn out to be completely innocuous, that's a good security culture.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does. And I'm wondering also about, thinking back to the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was sent home to work remotely full time. And I know there were a lot of kind of security shortcuts that organizations took to make sure that their employees could remain productive no matter where they were. Do you think that now that we are almost 3 years into this pandemic and so many organizations are still working fully remotely, do you think that in and of itself kind of poses an insider risk or insider threat, because there is this, I'm sure a lot of organizations have kind of worked to kind of lock down their systems again, but I'm sure there are a healthy number of companies that have just kind of kept working the way that they've been working since the beginning of the pandemic because nothing is broken in their minds. So do you think that also is kind of maybe contributing a little bit to this insider threat?
Yeah, there is absolutely a risk. As we start that third year of the pandemic, 2 years ago, so let's kind of go back to when roughly this all started for us. I think from my perspective, we've really seen 3 waves of activity around security. The first and maybe the most obvious one was when people couldn't go into the office anymore, they still had a need to work. So companies and organizations had to figure out how to securely let those individuals connect back to the corporate infrastructure, to connect back to those assets. Maybe that was through a virtual private network, VPN capabilities. Some companies I spoke to had VPNs, most do today, but they weren't licensed for the right capacity You might have been in an organization where 5% of your workforce worked remotely, and all of a sudden you had 100% or 95%. So there were licensing concerns, but the big scramble was, how can I support my employees working in the best place and the safest place that they can, which tended to be the home, and make sure that everything is secure. So there was kind of, let's call that maybe an authentication wave to make sure that folks could get in securely. There was a second wave, and it's a wave that's a little closer to what NetWitness has traditionally been focused on, around then monitoring those connections. Many organizations had structured their corporate networks not assuming that there were going to be these huge volumes of individuals transacting huge volumes of data through the VPN infrastructure. So they might have great sensors scattered throughout the corporate environment looking for this or that. They may not have had really good visibility into the VPN. VPNs, one of the reasons that they are secure, of course, is that traffic tends to be encrypted. So there's a technical challenge there in being able to see what's actually traveling on the wire. If you want to be able to see that this employee who's sitting at home is opening a connection to this website, for example. If all that's encrypted, that gets kind of hard, if not impossible. So there was kind of a monitoring wave where organizations realized that maybe they didn't have sufficient tooling in place. And a lot of organizations have worked through that. The third and the final wave, and the end of this long answer, Charlene, is we're in the middle of the third wave right now because the shortcuts that you mentioned. Every organization was forced to take shortcuts at the beginning of 2020. Even the most mature organizations did not necessarily have a fully formed and comprehensive plan to support the reality that we were all living through. So there were shortcuts that were made. Maybe some systems were made less secure to enable that those now remote users could still access them to get their job. And in the hullabaloo, if I can use that phrase, sometimes you put out the fire and you pat yourself on the back and you go to fight some other fire, and you might not realize that that initial fire is actually still burning. We started advising organizations about a year ago to go back and revisit all of their assumptions. Hopefully they documented that while everything was happening. Hopefully they've got good visibility, not just into those users, but into the nature of the systems, because there were shortcuts that were taken. And the more shortcuts that there are in an environment that security and management don't either remember or don't know about, that opens a door to, whether it's an insider threat or an external threat, to come into your environment. So shortcuts were made. The third wave is really around regulatory bodies that realize this. There are not going to be new regulations, Charlene, around the pandemic, but I do get the sense that regulatory bodies are going to be coming back to companies to enforce the existing regulations that were in place. And some companies may have made some shortcuts to keep operating. They may be exposed, not just to those threats, but to regulatory action.
Yeah, that was actually something that at the beginning of the pandemic, when this was all happening and there were just wholesale shifts to the cloud, and for organizations to, to your point, open up the VPNs and just kind of get that information flowing. One of the first things I thought of was, I wonder how many compliancy rules and regulations are being broken right at this moment. And so I wonder if that's going to kind of come back to haunt some organizations. But, when kind of circling back to the whole idea of the Great Resignation and the insider threats, do you think that the problem is going to get worse before it gets better? Or do you think that organizations are going to, I kind of feel like settle is probably a good word to kind of settle into where they are today compared with where they were almost 3 years ago, and take a real hard look at their security posture and recognize that, there are certain things that do need to happen with their security infrastructure to lock it down, to make it more secure, to mitigate the possibility of employees who do decide to leave, their ability to access information either before they leave, the wrong information either before they leave or after, to your point, after they've left. Do you think that that's going to be happening? I mean, I hope so, but
we're living in the new normal. So any organization that's waiting for the new normal to kind of settle down and figure out, you're just waiting. Maybe they know they've got an issue, but they're waiting for some reason. We've all been waiting for 2 years now. So I'm here to tell you it's here. Okay. And those organizations that are still waiting are those that are at the most risk of an insider threat. A lot of the insider threats, Charlene, believe it or not, aren't even necessarily malicious. They are accidents. They are well-meaning employees who might email something from a work account to a home account, or they might use that USB stick that we talked about before, honestly, because they need to print something off, and the only way they can get it to their printer is on a USB stick because they're at home. So I think that is the settling down capability. We're there at this point. It's super important for any security and risk management professional to remain flexible in terms of what we are experiencing right now. A year ago, when I think there was still a glimmer of hope, at least from this end of the phone, there was a glimmer of hope that maybe we would be bringing more people back into the office. I was advising organizations to take advantage of that inevitable Monday when people are going to start coming back in, to do things like set up a desk at the guard desk out front. And before that employee physically interconnects back with the corporate network with maybe their laptop, do a scan of that machine. Make that part of the first day's exercises. So I was advising folks to plan that out, and you can only support so many of that per day. And now we're a year later, and that's really kind of laughable, because not in every industry, but in most industries, it certainly looks like we are not going back to that model. So being flexible, understanding that your architecture, if you're that security architect, if you're that security leader, the odds are that your IT infrastructure was built and designed and implemented around an assumption that folks were going to be in the office. And maybe you were, as most organizations have already started thinking about that cloud journey that you mentioned. Maybe you were starting to move to the cloud, but everybody's plans certainly got upended, and budgets have been upended. I've got some customers, Charlene, who squeezed 2 to 2.5 years of digital transformation plans into the first 3 months of the pandemic. And not everybody has the budget that they can pull forward for that. But that's a great example of being nimble and understanding that things have changed. So that is a long answer to your question. I think that as long as you're not sitting still, as long as you're not waiting for things to get back to normal, you'll be in good shape.
All right. Well, I agree with you 100%. I don't think we are going back to what we knew before in any way, shape, or form. So it's time that organizations really kind of decided that, we're not doing it in person anymore, at least not full time. But Ben, thank you so much for your insight. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks again.
Charlene, it's my pleasure. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. We have a whole ton of webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Here are three that are happening this week and next. Actually, I think they're all happening this week, in the hopes that you will be able to mark your calendar and join us. Okay, the first one is called Google Salsa and NIST SSDF, Emerging Software Supply Chain Security Best Practices. This one is happening Wednesday, February 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by Cycode. The severity and frequency of software supply chain attacks have increased significantly. At the behest of an executive order from the Biden administration, NIST created the Secure Software Development Framework, or SSDF, with robust guidance for securing the software supply chain. Similarly, Google has released the Supply Chain Levels for Software Artifact, or SALSA, framework for ensuring software supply chain and build integrity. This webinar will provide an introduction to the rise of software supply chain attacks and compare and contrast NIST SSDF and Google SALSA. That one's going to be a good one. Okay, the second webinar is called Application Security Scanning in the Repository, Best Practices. This one is happening Thursday, February 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by WhiteSource. Historically, if organizations wanted to automate and enforce application security testing, the place to do that, the best place to do that, was within CI/CD pipelines. As time went on, though, we realized that while pipeline scanning has its place in securing applications, it doesn't scale as more and more plugins are needed. And with that, the task of managing them becomes a real headache. To get closer to being truly part of a development team's native workflow, application security needs to be part of the in the code repository ecosystem. This webinar will focus on why scanning in the repository is the most effective way to secure your applications and reduce your risk, from enforcing policies to providing feedback on demand to preventing context switching. Another good one. All right, the third webinar is called How Secure Backups and Analytics Can Help You Recover from Ransomware in Hours. This one is also happening Thursday, February 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by Rubrik. As ransomware attacks become more frequent and costly, having a solid ransomware remediation plan is a critical component of an organization's security posture. That said, simply securing the production environment is not enough. Bad actors are constantly shifting their attack strategies, often targeting backup data as well. Implementing a strong data security platform is a key component of building a solid security posture, ensuring there are no gaps in an organization's cybersecurity defense. So this webinar will discuss, among other things, why legacy backup and recovery products pose a risk to an organization, and some best practices for addressing ransomware threats through data security measures. This webinar also is going to feature an end-to-end demo of ransomware attack recovery from Rubrik, and you know how much I love those demos. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a fresh batch. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back. Next up, we've got The View with Vizard. In this conversation, Mike Vizard is speaking with Commodore CTO Eitel Schwartz. They discuss a new open source project called ValidCube that makes it easier to troubleshoot Kubernetes clusters. It's a great technology, certainly should be well received in the industry. And it is a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Eitel Schwartz, who's the CTO for Commodore, and they have launched a new open source project called ValidCube, which apparently takes care of validation, security, and cleans up your Kubernetes code. Eitel, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be here.
All right, this thing does quite a lot. What is the problem you guys are trying to solve, and why didn't we solve this before?
Yeah. Great question. So ValidCube is basically taking 3 other open source projects, combining them into a very simple website, and open sourcing it and allowing our users to use it as much as they want. The problem we want to solve is that Kubernetes is damn hard, and I think it's not a big surprise to anyone who ever used Kubernetes that there are a lot of small gotchas and a lot of places you can fall inside Kubernetes. So what we did is to take the very basic object of Kubernetes, which is a YAML file, and taking 3 very popular open source projects and combining them into a simple site that you can use without the need to install something or without the need to do something on your site, on your own computer. So you can bring ValidCube a YAML file that you have, and ValidCube will, for you, do 3 different things. The first one is validate, making sure the specific YAML file is in the Kubernetes standards. And it is very, something that is very critical, because sometimes when you upload a YAML to Kubernetes, which is not valid, Kubernetes just go crazy. It doesn't give you a good, valid response, but it has very weird error responses. So the first option is basically validating the YAML that you have to Kubernetes practices. The second thing is the cleaning part, and that is giving a Kubernetes YAML that has a lot of metadata fields, because you just take a YAML file from within the cluster. We clean all of the irrelevant fields so you can reuse the same YAML file in different places. So for the first option, the validation phase, we're using kubeval, which is the most popular open source for Kubernetes validation. For the second part, we use kubnit, which is the most popular open source project for cleaning Kubernetes YAML files from redundant metadata. The third thing that we do is secure your YAML file. We use an open source project named Trivi, and given a YAML file, it scans all of the different best practices in terms of security, and it informs you that you have a problem with this in these fields, and it has 3 severity level: high, medium, low. And without needing to install anything, you just bring the YAML file, you get all of the 3 out of the box.
Right. Is this aimed more at the DevOps team and the ops side of the house rather than the developers themselves, or who's going to lead the charge on this whole?
Yeah, so great question. I will try it back to the one who is responsible for the YAML files. In some organization, it might be the developers. In some organization, it might be the DevOps. But I'm sure that everyone who tried uploading manually all kinds of Kubernetes YAML files has encountered the issues that we are trying to solve. I will say we are based on 3 very good open source projects. We just took them and made it a lot simpler to use and to start. So I think everyone who is trying to get a quick fix for a problem is going to use ValidCube and basically enjoy the capabilities.
Do you think a lot of IT folks are still intimidated by the proverbial wall of YAML files that they encounter when they're supposed to be managing Kubernetes, and this is an effort to maybe alleviate some of that stress?
Yeah, I will say definitely. And like I said, the thing about Kubernetes is it makes it looks very easy to get started, right? but then you are trying to submit the YAML file and things crash or not work, and then you have no idea what just went wrong here. So we try to give like a first aid on those kind of issues without the user needing to understand too much about Kubernetes validation, or without the need to like download a lot of like files and like packages to solve it. But yeah, IT are indeed one of the target audience here.
I also feel like it limits adoption of Kubernetes clusters, because once you get to a certain number, you start being confronted with all these YAML files multiplied. So do you think that part of the issue of scale and how we're expanding usage of Kubernetes is tied to this issue, because it requires one person might only be able to manage at this rate a handful of Kubernetes clusters?
Yeah, totally. And I think we see more and more like YAML templates that take one YAML that create and generate like dozens of different YAMLs, generate dozens of different YAMLs. So I think like this is a problem. But I'll be frank with you, like I worked with, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, AWS CloudFormation. By far, I prefer like Kubernetes YAML the most in order to describe to the state that I'm trying to reach. So I think like it is the best out of all options that I worked with. And more and more templating is becoming more and more predominant in like big organization or organization that needs to handle a lot of files. And I hope like CRDs and template will help solve and manage the YAML expanding problem.
I feel one of the issues that we also run into is there's a lot of knobs that can be turned on the proverbial Kubernetes cluster, and the more knobs there are, the more likely it is mistakes will be made, and we see a lot of misconfigurations. So is this part of an effort to also reduce the number of misconfigurations of clusters that might be out there?
Yeah, I do hope. Like I will say Commodore in particular try to help like both in like our product, try to help with that exact problem. And I will say that the complexity and the different options is great for the superpower users who are already acquainted with Kubernetes and already know the bits and bytes, but it does make the day two operation of Kubernetes cluster very, very difficult, because there are so many ways of cutting your own leg. So we see it for our customers, and I hope ValidKube will help ease the way, especially for people who are not super duper Kubernetes experts.
Mm-hmm. Do you think at some point some of these technologies might be shifted into the main Kubernetes project, or will they always be an adjunct to it, or what's the relationship?
It's a good question. Kubernetes tries to be it tried not to bring all of this baggage with it for most projects. And I do love the fact that the open source community is creating and maintaining it, because it allows it to move much faster than if Kubernetes would adopt one of those projects. Things are moving really, really fast. I believe that maybe in a year or two, as the ecosystem will stabilize, more and more things might shift into Kubernetes, but I don't think it's something that we'll see in the near future. But I didn't read the latest SIG and the roadmap, so I might be mistaken here. Feel free to correct me. I'm not that I might miss something in the Kubernetes roadmap here.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a chicken and egg relationship between Kubernetes and DevOps? It's kind of like you really can't manage Kubernetes without a DevOps workflow. So as more people embrace Kubernetes, are they pulling themselves into DevOps, or do they need DevOps first and before they even get near Kubernetes?
No, I really don't think there's a chicken and egg. I think people are moving to Kubernetes with or without DevOps, and that's one of their problems. It is more people are moving almost blindly into Kubernetes, and then they don't really understand Kubernetes, and now they need DevOps, Kubernetes expert, SRE, doesn't really matter how you call them. But for better or worse, people are moving to Kubernetes, sometimes without proper knowledge, training, understanding of what they are trying to solve and how. So yeah, that's my take, at least from seeing dozens of different customers and Kubernetes users.
So some of this is an IT fashion trend, and some of it is actual use case, and maybe folks should take a second and say, am I doing this for my resume, or am I doing this to solve a specific problem?
Yeah. And I think like it's not only the resume, like the cool things or the cool kids are using Kubernetes. So I'm also going to use Kubernetes, like I'm going to use ECS now. But I also like Kubernetes, so it's hard for me. Like overall, I do love the technology.
What is your best advice to folks other than hanging out on the Kumidor website, of course, but to get started with Kubernetes and to put a plan in place to make it scale in a way that's reasonable? I mean, what should they be doing?
Like one of two, like be ready to spend a lot of time. Just knowing that you are now starting a very complex journey, it will take time, it will take resources, and don't close your eyes and hope for the best because Kubernetes is complex. So that's option number one. Option number two is to use like experienced help. So having like even one guy in the team or girl that are Kubernetes expert that know how to do like the basic setup, the ramp up, it can change your adoption rate from like years to, months for big organization. And I think the knowledge is like almost priceless. So if I would take like a big company and try to migrate to Kubernetes, I would try to have like at least one person in the team or even an external help to help me like overcome the most obvious problems that I'm going to face. Because like there's a lot of knobs, like you said, that can be twisted and can have dramatic effect on the Kubernetes and its performance.
All right, cool. Hey, Idil, thanks for being on the show and sharing some knowledge and insights.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Was happy to be here.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, that wraps up another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'll be back tomorrow with a brand new one. Before I close things out, though, I do want to remind you of a couple things we've got going on here at Techstrong Group. First up, we've got the IBM Automation Insights virtual event. That is happening February 23rd. It's a half-day event. Kind of short and sweet, but it has got some great speakers talking about IBM and automation and how organizations can incorporate automation into their workflows and so much more. So definitely want to check that one out. We also have, on the heels of that, March 1st, a virtual event sponsored by Sneak. It is called Know Your Code, Open Source and Supply Chain Summit. This is one for the books, guys. You got to check this one out. Great topic, a great lineup of speakers. Another one-day event focusing on cybersecurity and open source security. So definitely want to check that one out also. We also have a number of live roadshow style events that are going to be happening throughout the country, but we kick things off with those March 29th. We're going to kick that off in Atlanta. We have one day workshop type roadshow that focuses on DevOps and cloud native, and then right after that, a one-day workshop focused on cybersecurity. See what we did there? So we're going to have those all across the country throughout the year, like I said. So please, you do want to check out the lineup for those as well. And then we also have coming down the pike our InnoTech live events. First one, I believe, is happening in Austin. Then we've got one set up for Dallas, and there's going to be one in Houston and Washington, D.C. And so you do want in Oklahoma City, of course. So you do want to check the lineup, check out the lineup for those as well. You can find out information on all of these events and more at techstrongevents.com. And and you can click on the individual events and check out the agenda, check out the lineup of speakers, and register for them. I do hope you'll be able to join us for at least one and hopefully more of our virtual and live events. And that was a mouthful. And so with that, I'm going to say happy Valentine's Day to everybody. And I will see you tomorrow for another Techstrong TV broadcast. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.